Hey everyone, welcome back or welcome to an all new episode of the 20% Podcast. This is the show that brings you tips and tricks from industry professionals across all industries that you could implement in your current job today. I'm your host, Tyler Meckes, and I've been so excited for this conversation. This is somebody I have been following for a really long time on LinkedIn. He is a musician. He talks about go to market. He talks about mental health and really everything in between. From the age of 12 years old, he started writing music and creating content. He decided he wanted to go to he had some fun conversations around college before ultimately ended up in the sales and marketing world, where now, as of 3 weeks ago, and when we're recording, he just started as a full-fledged entrepreneur. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Sims Tillirson to the 20% Podcast. Sims, so great to finally meet you.
Dude, blast. So excited to be on. Appreciate you having me. This is going to be fun.
It was so fun. And even just, and I think I start every episode like this, but like, first and foremost, build your personal brand. I cannot emphasize it enough because Sims and I have never met prior to this conversation, but even in the first 14 minutes or so of us talking, it's almost like we've known each other for a while, and we could really cut all of any of the like awkwardness in between talking. Sims, do you have any immediate thoughts on that before we talk about your background?
Dude, that's building your personal brand is the best advice I think anyone can give anyone else because you're so right. Like we jumped in to the important stuff, the meat, the things that people care about when we get to know each other, and we didn't have to talk about like the weather or the the NFC championship game last night, which is fine, but it's just so cool to be able to go deep with people quick when you already feel like you know them.
Dude, it's so funny, and you say that. Like, I'm so happy to talk about the NFC Championship game though too, because even if I look back a couple of years ago, I'm in Philly. I don't know if you know this, so I have my Enquire from the last time they won the Super Bowl. So timely. Hopefully we see that coming up. But to your point, Sims, I'm so glad that we didn't actually have to go through that because,
Yeah.
like, why or the weather? Well, no, we're not talking about weather anymore. Sims, let's talk about your background now. I'm so excited to dive back in. Um, Tell us about the early years of growing up. I know I mentioned in the intro, like you said, hey,
Yeah.
writing music and creating, but could you tell us a little bit more about, the early Sims and what some of those early years were like before you started thinking about anything professionally?
For sure. So I grew up in a really, really small town in Georgia, 70 miles from the interstate in every direction. Um, and so there wasn't a lot to do. My parents really, really pushed me to get involved in music, made me take piano lessons from an early age, which I hated. And then, as you can imagine, in a small town in Georgia, church was kind of like our center point. And so, as most Southern churches do with anybody that's got a smidge of musical talent, I was up on stage from a very early age, learning to play lots of instruments. And I found a love for music and specifically lyrics. So I mentioned to you like I've been writing poetry and music for 20 years, which is a 32-year-old man is weird to say.
Yeah, no, I mean it is, but at the same token, like as we were saying before, a lot of the things that you're doing in those early years are things that you can take. There are these like foundational skills that you liked writing and you liked music. And maybe if we put those two together, that's could be a job, or maybe it could not. And as we get later on, as we're talking about some of your keynotes and stuff, we'll get into the
Yeah.
how all those worlds are coming back together as well. But I think it's really cool though that like you early age, you're still writing, and like you mentioned that I didn't like the piano lessons, but then later you found a way for loving music. You could have just stopped and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this," or I could have
Yep.
hated it just because they were pushing it down your throat. What's your piece of advice for doing things that maybe you're pushed to not want to do necessarily, but there could be some benefit later on, as you've seen?
Yeah, so for me, I play 8 instruments, Tyler. I don't play any of them really well, but I can play 8 instruments. I could jump on the stage with anybody and play. I would not be able to play any of those instruments if I hadn't taken the piano lessons in the first place. Like I didn't know what I was learning at the time, but I remember um, early high school, I went to a summer camp for musicians, and it was very intensive music theory, deep learning, and I'd never taken music theory before. And so they asked me to test in to see what class I should go into. And lo and behold, I tested into the most advanced theory class. But it wasn't because I'm some like musical Einstein. It was because I had learned the piano. And so every concept they were talking about, I didn't think of it as theory. I just thought of it as, oh, my piano teacher taught me that. But it was these foundational concepts that I couldn't do the thing that I love most in the world if I hadn't learned that. And so I encourage everybody listening, like, if you're being pushed to learn a skill like that and it's not fun in the moment, just like learning to cold call and learning to email is not fun in the moment. Like, you have to have those foundational principles locked in to be successful later on.
My God, I don't know if everybody else has the chills while you're saying this, but I certainly do. And I think it's so important that there's so many things in life, whether it's, we'll use the example of piano, but this goes along to your entire career and any other skill that you're going to develop. You need to learn the foundations, and that is what's going to allow you to build up later on. To Sims's point, he didn't know knowing the theory and the foundations in the background is so important because had he not done that, he couldn't have learned those other things. I believe that there's a ton of different things that also like professionally that we should know as well. Sims, before I lead the witness on this, like, let's bring it back to like a little bit early, like 15, 16-year-old Sims. Then if you're looking back as 32-year-old Sims, what are some of the foundational skills that you think would be really important? I'll give you one. Personal finance, I think, is really important, and you should learn the basics of that. And you probably know that really well as your own business owner now. Tell me, what other skills do you think would be important for somebody at that age as well?
Yeah, so personal finance is definitely one that I wish I had leaned into harder. I started working at 13. So I've been working for a long time, but a lot of my money was just like, okay, I have $100 in my pocket. I want to go see my girlfriend, you know, in the county over. So that'll be $30 for gas. And, I was just planning for like the little things I wanted to do instead of things in the future.
Mhm.
But some of the other skills, two of the other skills that are really important to me that I still lean on to this day, one is just hard work, like understanding the value of busting your butt for a little while. So I grew up working farms and in agriculture a lot, and that's hard work. But you can always feel proud of it. And like today, if I have a hard day in the office, it sucks, but it's not as hard as breaking my back in the sun. And then the other is like really listening to people when you talk to them, like doing whatever you can to make the person you're speaking to feel like they're the only person in the world. And the way that I learned this was in the agriculture business as well, because I worked for a feed mill starting when I was 16. And so I was a laborer. I would, make feed, really do anything that I needed to do. But farmers would come talk to me and tell me about their needs. And even though I was 16 years old, if I gave somebody the wrong thing, it could hurt their business tremendously and could hurt my boss's business tremendously. So I had to learn to very intently listen to what I'll call my prospects. Even though I wasn't a commission sales guy, I was a guy moving product to try to help people.
Oh, 100%. And again, it all comes down. I think I said this when we were warming up. I haven't said it on air yet, but it's all about the problems that you were trying to help people face.
Yeah.
And that is how any business interaction happens, whether there's money involved or not. Somebody has some type of problem, and either you could solve it or they need to find somebody else to solve it. So but also while you're doing that, you learn so much about the agricultural industry. And now, do you have any clients now in your consulting that are in the ag space, or like, is it just more in general, just the importance of business acumen? I think
Yeah.
is here.
It's in general the importance of business acumen, but I'll tell you this, and not everybody knows because I've been in employee benefits and insurance for the past 10 years, but I started my professional career in agriculture as a superintendent for grain elevators in rural South Carolina. So I did take that with me into my first job out of college.
It's amazing, right? And you have no idea. It's like, oh, that's what I'm going to grasp onto that because I know this. And that's where you have a competitive advantage in just in the information side of it, right? But there's still so many skills that you learn, like you learn how to problem solve and and then you could probably take that feedback that you were learning from the farmers and saying, hey, maybe we should do this. This is the needs that these people have. How do we change this? How do we adopt this? How do we change our product roadmap? Right here, there's where it starts to transfer in, and Sims is
Right.
smiling ear to ear for people who are listening here as well. Any other thoughts on there? That's there.
No, I love it. I think that one of the major responsibilities of any revenue generating people is to serve as the voice of the customer back to your executive team. And this is like whether you're an SDR or a VP of sales or anything in between, I think that that is one of our key responsibilities, whether it's written in the job description or not.
Well, and I think that I mean, that aligns to something that I'm really passionate about is cross-functional collaboration, especially in the early stage, right? We need to make sure that we are aligned on the exact goals that we have, especially when resources are low, because every single minute and every single thing that we're doing is important. And what we need to do is we need to find the ways to, hey, I'm going to do this one. We have 5 different goals. How could I do one activity that at least checks the marks off of a bunch of that, right? How do we have a webinar, or we need to create content for our website? We need to brand awareness, and we need to try to product market. Well, let's have a webinar so that we could bring our partners in and record that content and then put it on YouTube and podcast and yada yada yada. Right? It's how do we circumvent all of that? Any other what are your thoughts on that specifically as well?
Yeah, I love that idea, and I certainly, we talked about I have a hefty ownership stake in a media company, and that's a lot of what we do starts with one big thing in terms of content that we can use, repurpose, trickle down, chop up to solve a bunch of different business needs all at once. So I love that take.
No, 100%, 100%. Now let's continue talking through. So, okay, so you have that you're this music wannabe writer, you like writing, and then you're in the ag business at 16 years old. Tell us about leading up to what you wanted to do for college. What was
Yeah.
that story?
Yeah, so my initial hope was, hey, I want to go become a college professor and teach creative writing or literature or something like that. I was really into books, really into writing. My parents encouraged me to maybe have a look at some other options if I wanted to feed myself. So said, all right. And I was telling you about this in the warm up, but like I applied to Berkeley School of Music in Boston because I said, okay, well, if writing is not the thing, like let's go with my real dream, which is to be a musician. So get into Berkeley School of Music and putting together um, a lot of stuff that they've requested so that I can see if I can get a scholarship from them. And during that time, my parents go to purchase a new car at CarMax. They're excited that I've gotten into Berkeley. They're talking to the sales manager about it. And the sales manager goes, "Oh, that's where I went to school." And so, my parents bring that story back to me, and their guidance is just, hey, if this is really absolutely what you want to do, we're 100% behind you. But we think you should consider some alternative options that won't leave you, out of school with a 4-year degree going to sell cars. Which there's nothing wrong with that, but their point was, hey bro, if you're gonna go sell cars, just go do that now. Don't go to college for 4 years for music and then go do that. So that was wild. And eventually I went to Georgia Tech to study mechanical engineering because it felt safe. But as I've told you, I got kicked out twice. I was a bar musician in Atlanta, had a lot of fun. And then I also was involved in some not so legal activities that took me away from classwork as well. And in the end, I graduated from a little college in Clinton, South Carolina called Presbyterian College with a degree in business management.
I love that. Well, like that's, I mean, like first and foremost, I'm not saying I love the whole story. I love how you ended up still coming back and finding like you found the business passion, which you're obviously in now. But I think that it's so interesting that like you had your parents there to tell you that specific thing. And had they not pushed back on that, it's really interesting. Like if they didn't buy that one, I always think like there's these big moments that don't seem big at the time, but like had your parents not gone that day or had that guy not been there, like who knows what would have actually happened. And not to get on the woo side of it, but like it is really wild to think about like how would it have been if that had not happened?
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think it's interesting too that like you still found some passion and you still were doing some of the music and stuff while you were in college and doing the musician. But when you talk about mechanical engineering, like I think engineers are just genuinely problem solvers. Was there any experience even when you were in and out of school that like you learned how to problem solve, or like was there any big takeaways from that in class experience there?
So I'm gonna be super honest with you, Tyler. I like barely went to class. I can illustrate that with for you with a quick story. One of my best friends, who's a fraternity brother of mine, a guy named Jonathan Radavoy, he was one of those guys that had less natural ability when it came to school than I did, but he was the guy that would work harder than anybody else. So we were taking an entry level computer science class together, met Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. And I will never forget this day. I can see it like it was yesterday. He busts into my room at the fraternity house. It's 10:45 in the morning. Like, Radavoy, get the hell out of here, dude. Because it's Friday morning. I just played Moondogs and Buckhead the night before until 4 a.m. I'm gassed. I've had way too much to drink, been up all night. And he's like, dude, we've got our midterm in 15 minutes. And I'm like, bro, leave me alone. Like, I know you're just yanking my chain. Come back after class. We'll get lunch, chop it up, whatever. No, we really had a midterm, and I really went and took it, and I really made, I don't remember the exact grade, but it was under a 20 out of 100. So that was what my experience at college was like, at least the first time around. There's a lot of not going to class, and when I did, facing failure often.
Yeah, 100%. And now I guess like the big question there is that like, knowing what you know now, there's a lot of failures that happens in sales, and most of the time is failing. Like, was there anything that like I've always been a believer that like the hard times are the things where you're going to build grit and you're going to learn and you're going to get those
Mhm.
calluses so that you could do it later on. Was there any silver lining in some of those negative situations it's helpful today?
For sure. So I got kicked out, as you can imagine, because I had a 1.13 grade point average after my first year at Georgia Tech. I went home, and my dad he's an executive at a very large mining company. So he put me to work in the mine and in the factory that summer because I obviously wasn't going to college. So I did that, and he was trying to paint the picture for me of, hey man, this is what your life's going to be like if you don't get it together. Not to say that it was a bad life by any means, but I didn't want to stay in my hometown forever, man. I needed to get out. So what that led to was me going to community college for a year and being kind of an ass because I felt like I was a level above the people I was around. That melted away by the time I finished up there, and I got readmitted to Georgia Tech. Went back, studied pretty hard, was on contract to make a 3.0 for 2 semesters in a row, made a 3.5 the first semester, and the second semester, I took my foot off the gas. I made a 2.95, and I got kicked out again. And so then I was in a position over winter break, so like 2 weeks, where I had to find a new school to take me. And there was only two schools in the country that would agree to take me. One of them is a military college in North Georgia. Didn't want to go there. And the other one was Presbyterian College in Clinton, South Carolina. Far cry from Georgia Tech. But once I got there, I knew that there was no backup plan after this. Like, I've gotten all my strikes. I've got more strikes than most people ever get allotted to them. So I have to make this work. And luckily, the environment was just one where I almost couldn't fail. My class sizes went from like 300 people lecture halls to my first class at PC, there were 3 people in it, including me. So there was nowhere to hide. My professors, they never had to do this to me, thankfully, but they would go get people out of their dorms if they skipped class, bring the whole class to the door. So I had nowhere to hide and really no excuses anymore. And thankfully, I finished up at PC. my coursework there with like a 3.5 or something, and made it out, and still made it out of college in 4 years total. But man, I had a lot more grace than I deserved
No, and
throughout those 4 years.
well, and kudos to you, man. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I think that there's so many things that we could dive into on that. I think first and foremost, like it's not easy going out and being on your own because that is like because it's always like the should we go to college or not go to college? And that's a huge question that a lot of people face. And even like, having some kids now, it's like, well, should they go or should they not go?
Yeah,
Fortunately, it's a long time away that they have to make that decision. But as the parent, it's like, wow, well, like, is it the right, like you learn so much about being on your own and having to be accountable and having all that stuff, but then it's also like, do you need to accrue all of the debt, and like do you know what you're going to be? I firmly believe that if you have a good idea and you're testing early, and this is ideal world, but like
yeah,
getting some of those experiences early on and you're determining, hey, this is something that I at least like to do. Well, do you need to go to college for that or do you not? Some things, yeah, 100%. If you're going to go be a physician or something, like specific roles, you need to go and get that formalized education.
absolutely.
But a lot of the time, there's other things like the real world 101 experience that you're going to get is far more than what you're actually going to get, especially with some of these like business rules or some of like the business lessons and stuff like that too.
Yeah,
So I think that and I'm sure you probably see a lot of that too. But like, I guess the final lesson, it's like for somebody, obviously going through some of those things, if you saw somebody else who was going down the same path as young Sims, as in like hey, I'm could potentially get kicked out, yada yada. What piece of advice would you have for them?
the piece of advice that I'd have for them is that after I finished all of that, even though I had like a very good cumulative grade point average, that story was very hard to tell potential employers. I had zero job offers when I got out of college. Zero. I had to call Sonny Perdue, former governor of Georgia, who before he went and worked for Donald Trump in his first term, owned a bunch of grain elevators. And I had to go call him and say, I will run any of your grain elevators in any state, in any city. Just give me a shot. And I got lucky because he took a chance on me. And
But
only because he knew I had a little bit of background working farms and working feed mills. But that's the truth of this whole story is that without that connection, that family connection, I had no job prospects because of what I did, because of the choices that I made during college.
right, and that goes to show you there's a couple big lessons there for me. And number one, it's far more important to know like you say like your net worth is your net worth, or network is your net worth, and all those things. And like it is so true. It is so important to know those people. But I think the bigger lesson from that is that even if you have gone through some negative situations, like you had your back up against the wall and you showed that you were a fighter, you showed you were gritty, and there's still things that you could have said like, hey, that was who I was, but I've learned and I've done this and this taught me this. When you start to be able to tell and own your career story and learn how to sell yourself, because that's one of the early foundational skills I would have, how to like sell and market yourself. Um, that's exactly what you did. You had your back up against the wall, and sometimes people don't actually move until they have their back up against the wall. What piece of advice would you have? Is there any more like proactivity now, or like hopefully, like what's your best piece of advice around maybe acting on things before your back is up against the wall and you need to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I was probably pouting and acting out to an extent because I was like going down this career path or this study path that I really wasn't interested in just because I thought it was the right thing to do. So, my encouragement for younger folks listening to this is like, trust your gut a little bit more. But if that's the decision you make, stick to it and work hard to get there. Because to your point, Tyler, I didn't unleash really any of my own potential until I had no other choice because my back was up against that wall. And it took me many years when I got into my professional career to get into a job that I enjoyed even remotely as a result of that.
Yeah, and I think that that's like, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but that's also the story that a lot of people have, and I think that
Yeah,
that's also one of the passions that I have of saying, hey, if we spend a little bit more time up front, maybe we could align, like maybe could we just pick up young Sims and just point him in this direction that he likes, and then
right.
let him go, not just and again, you live your lessons. It's your own story. I have my story. Everybody who's listening has their own story. But I think the big thing is think about what your story was and what did you do and what did that happen? Because when you go back, you could see how all of that accumulates and you think, wow, like now that I think about it, like that first job that I have, I learned like cold calling really sucked, but I could pick up the phone and go call anybody. If I need to get into a doctor, if I need to do something else, like there's real life skills that you could develop and it's important to develop. So, I mean, like that's a huge, that's why I'm so passionate about it too. Sims, let's move it through your career because I want to get to making sure we're talking about your consulting group now.
Yeah.
But, like obviously you spent over 10 years in the in the insurance space. What's your like what's your biggest lessons learned in the industry if you had to say like, hey, over the past 10 years um in this vertical, what are your biggest takeaways? I know it's a pretty big question.
It is a big question. So I'll give you a few. One of my biggest takeaways is a lesson that I learned from the CEO of the first benefits company I worked for, and that was Colonial Life, which is a subsidiary of Unum Group, big fortune company. I was talking to the CEO, and I was an entry level employee, but I had big dreams. And so I asked him what his best advice was to grow in the company and in my career. And what he said will always stick with me. Said everyone tries to frame career growth like a ladder, and it's not. It's a spiral staircase. He said sometimes you will have to move laterally, sometimes you will have to move back a little bit, but you need to learn every side of this business if you want to grow. You're not just going to walk up one career path and be useful to a big company like this. So I took that to heart, and I've moved around a lot. Um, the other lesson I learned is that regardless of what anyone tells you about how your resume will look, if you're in a bad fit job, and I don't mean a job you don't like, I mean a job that you don't like where you're not learning anything and you have no path to grow. So this is a job where when you leave it, you can't look back in 10 years and say, hey, that really sucked, but I learned this really important thing. My advice is when you get in a bad fit job, leave as quickly as you can and get to something new. I credit a lot of my success to being willing to do that, to be willing to move somewhere maybe that's risky in the traditional sense, but that suited my need to learn and to grow in a bigger way.
Okay, Sims, but you could feel like a failure if you potentially do that. How do you put your pride aside? That's not easy.
I think I've learned, and a lot of this comes with creating content and just putting myself out there to lots of strangers. Everybody, like, you will never make a decision that everybody will be happy with. Somebody is going to have a problem with what a decision you make, no matter what it is. So the way I had to start thinking about my career is that it is mine and mine alone. And I had to trust myself a lot because I had to be able to tell that story when I had short stints at companies and I moved. But
Oh,
it's worked out just fine for me.
100%. And guess what? And I said that question a little bit devil's advocately, and I hope that
Yeah.
you got that too. It's there's so much like, we've all been in jobs that aren't the right fit. And
Yeah.
like as an example, like, you could only know what there's a million different reasons why a job could not be a good fit. But there's a really good analogy that I heard about this too. It's like, hey, you look at your neighbor's house and you're like, hey, they're nice people, they're great, it looks like they're doing good. But then like what happens when your house floods and you have to go and stay with your neighbor and you go in their house and you realize, oh no, this is a mess. This isn't what I thought it was. I didn't know about this. I didn't know. That's exactly what it's like. You could have asked some questions up at the front door before you got in there and you thought you could have had a good idea of what was going on. But up until you get into that house, you don't realize what the situation's like.
You're
So
so right.
had you known some of that information, you would have never walked in that door in the
Right.
first place. So that's why it's like, had you known that information, then you walk away. That's why it comes down to having the hard conversations and trying to navigate that at least from the experience that I've had and a lot of folks that I've talked to as well. What's some of your thoughts? Is that how you see it too? Because I feel like so many people, it's a really tough thing to put your pride aside or feel like, hey, it's spent so much time. I used all of those their resources. I feel bad. I'm genuinely a good person, but I don't like I can't do this because it's not right. And I need to get out, but I don't feel like it's okay to get out. Does that resonate to you too?
It does, and I do think that a learned skill is doing better discovery when you're when you're evaluating job opportunities. And to your point, not asking questions like, "Do you have product market fit?" and trusting the answer, right? Like going deep, doing research, really understanding. But I've also learned that when you're unhappy in a company, you don't do great work. People can tell. And so when it's a bad fit, your employer is not going to be in a position where they're like, "Oh no, you're killing us. We desperately need you to stay." Like when things aren't working out, I think it's in the best interest of everyone to just cut it as quickly as you can. If that is the intent of both parties, is that, hey, neither of us are as happy with this as we thought we would be. Let's have an honest conversation and figure out how to move forward quickly before I waste more time and the company wastes more money.
100%. And if you're upfront and honest and say like, "Hey, I'm going to be professional. I'm going to do this." Companies will find they if they do like you and they do care, they will try to find a way to make it work because they
Sure.
spent a lot of time and effort and resources. But I think it's this the not being afraid to have that conversation because it's not fun. And going into it, you know it's not going to be fun. But again, to your point, you could only discover so much. But I think the other big thing on that is that like in my experience, what I've seen, you ask questions in an interview to try to sound smart or try to sound interested in their business.
Yep.
When you should really be asking questions to evaluate, is this a good fit for me also?
Yep.
Because sometimes, and again, it's tough too, because sometimes you're in a situation, especially in a tough job market, where you're just happy to get that interview. But really, you don't want to just jump into a situation that you know is going to be bad because it's not gonna it's just kicking the can down the road
Right.
as well. And I think that once you understand that, it's huge. So that's I'm so glad that you kind of see things that way as well because I
Yeah,
think like
absolutely.
the big thing like people need to like be okay with it not being a good fit. And when you're professional, like that's all you could do, take the high road. Um
100%. It's just business. Truly. I mean that.
yeah, 100%, man. Thank you for that. That's I hope that people get validation in it's okay for it to not be a good move for
Yeah.
you. And again, like I've been in situations like right now at Pipe Dream doing, I'm leading partnerships and doing a lot of the content and the second go to market hire. So I love what I'm doing. And but it took a lot of kissing frogs, I guess, to
Right.
be able to get in. And not all of those are bad. I've had a lot of great experiences, but just to the whole point of like, you're not going to just go in and know automatically as well.
Right.
Sims, let's talk now. Last couple minutes. Let's talk about the decision to go full speed ahead into your own business. So,
Yeah.
January 27th, when we're recording this, it's going to be this episode will be out in early February. You're in month one of full fledged
Yep.
entrepreneurship. Tell us what that experience is like. And ultimately, I'd love to understand the decision to go full speed ahead
Yeah.
because there's so many people who are in a job and they're like, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? Hear a lot of different stories like this, but I'd love to hear yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for context, I started building this business in December of 2023. So, I've been building a book for about the last year. Um, in January 1st, let's say, I was in a W-2 head of sales role for a 3-year-old startup that's doing pretty well. We got them into a product led growth motion that required not a lot of salespeople to support. And the financial kind of situation for the company led to a conversation with the CEO that's like, hey, how big's your book right now? Would you be comfortable? We'd love to keep working with you. Would you be comfortable moving into a contract environment as our fractional chief revenue officer? And so it wasn't something that I necessarily expected, but took a look at the numbers, found that I was already, if if I expanded one contract, which I was able to do, I could bill my base salary that I was making for my W-2 job. So we set the path for kind of a 1 month run out for the end of my W-2. So that expires at the end of this month. And I'll move into a contract role there. And it was kind of the perfect storm. Because my plan was to stay one more year in this W-2 role, build a little bit more, and then walk out on my own January 1st, 2026. But universe doesn't usually work like that, right? We make plans, God, the universe, whoever you want to call it, laughs at us, right? So this was a situation that honestly could have been really negative for me if I had not had my business. Moving into a limited fractional CRO role, I would have been finding myself very quickly needing to go add 4 or 5 clients. But luckily, I have this whole book. And I just said, hey, we're going to do it. Talk to my wife. And she's like, yeah, you're not going to get another job. Like, this is what you've wanted to do. This is what you've been building for. Let's just do it. And so week one, horrifying, man. Terrifying. Like, woke up every day just like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Like, I need more clients. And I did and I didn't, right? Week two got a little better. I told my business coach, Jack, when we met that week, that I felt like I had the yips. And for anybody listening that doesn't know what that is, when elite professional athletes get a mental block, they sometimes like can't perform. Pitcher forgets how to throw a ball. If you've ever seen Space Jam, it's like when the Monstars take all the powers away from the NBA players and they can't shoot anymore.
Or
That's how.
Ben Simmons on the Philadelphia
Yeah.
76ers.
Yes. Yes, dude. But that's exactly how I felt. I felt like I'm an elite seller. I have built and sold a business. I've closed millions of dollars in revenue in a variety of different businesses. Like, why can't I do this? And so it's this big mental block. And I wrote about this on LinkedIn the other day, but it was a few Fridays ago. I was literally like crying to my wife, sobbing, like, I really think I need to go get a job. She's like, why do you feel like that? I'm like, because I can't do this. Like, I'm doing I'm doing sales the way I teach it to other people, and it's not working. That means people aren't going to buy me because what I do doesn't work. So I don't have a business anymore. And so I went through that, and then on Saturday morning, I woke up to an inbound lead from like a perfect ICP fit prospect. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to calm down. So I talked to that prospect that Monday. Things went really well. And we're going to be able to move forward. And then good things just started happening again. And now I feel like I'm in the pocket and I feel unstoppable. But I've also had to implement, like, I've had to change my morning routine, mandatory 5:30 wake up every morning, affirmations that I have taped to my mirror, my workout non-negotiable. And I've just had to lean in because I know that there will come another time where I feel like I'm failing. But my viewpoint on it is that failure isn't an option. Because I don't want another W-2 role. I want to run my business. And so I'm going to win.
So in a sense, you still got that back. You're not really, but you have that fake wall back up against the wall.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a better position than to actually be in there. But I think that too, like this is the story that I hear from almost every single entrepreneur. It's the FUD, right? The fear, uncertainty, and doubt of what's going to come in. And even if it's the best of the best that's going on, it's like you still Russell Wilson had the, like, it's not his thought, but like the neutral thinking, right?
Yeah.
Don't go not too high or not too low. It's the when things are going great and you get that inbound lead, great. But we don't want to make our self-worth all tied to that,
Right.
because when that's not there, you don't want to feel that as well. how do you, for yourself, and like obviously doing good, things are going great now. How do you, one, keep that momentum, and how do you, two, take your mind from going, oh no, like I could quickly in 1 second say that fear and doubt could come in. How do you try to like protect yourself from that too? I know that
Yeah,
that's another tough question.
it is, but a lot of it comes down for me to guardrails. So it's easy for me to say that like my priorities are myself, my wife, my kids, my business. But my actions don't always align to that, right? So one of the big guardrails that I've had to put in place is at about 5:30 Eastern in the evening, my phone goes away for the rest of the night because I'm a go-to-market advisor and sales coach. I'm not curing cancer. I'm not launching rockets into space. If I wait 12 hours to respond to a client, everything will be okay, right? So that's one of the main things is not always being attached to my phone, not always looking for the dopamine of an inbound lead or a LinkedIn post or seeing if somebody responded to my outbound, whatever it is. It's pushing myself and holding myself accountable to the priorities that I set, to the life that I want to live. Because otherwise, if I do stay attached to my phone, if I don't do that new morning routine I talked to you about, my business will be all encompassing for me. And that's not why I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to work for myself so I'd have control of my time, so I could spend more time with my family and do the things that make me happy. So I have to build those guardrails, or my tendency is to slip back into that bad behavior.
Oh, 100%. And first off, kudos to you, man. And whether it's the life you lived or just being able to understand this, it's like guardrails are so important no matter what you're doing, because to your point, you had those priorities of, my health, wife, how you said it. But sometimes your brain could say, well, in order to have a good life for my kids and my wife, I need to make sure that I'm putting this business first. But then is it the chicken or the egg? And then you feel guilty and you're like, well, I need to do this so we can have a good life, so we can make money. But then I'm making money so we can have a good life. And you get into
Right.
that, like oh no, what am I doing? So guardrails in that situation are perfect. And two, like it comes back to it. I have, start with why behind me for anybody listening. Your why, I mean, like for here, it's for you here, it's I want to spend time with my family during that 5:30 time. So that is why I need to shut down, and being able to have a really tight understanding of why you do things is really important too. I'm sure your family has a good portion of it, but like why do you do the things that you do, like that like 7 layers deep or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. When I get down to the deepest point, it really is that I want to own my time. That I don't want anyone else to decide what I'm going to do. Because Tyler, if I won the lottery today, like I would keep working my business a little bit, but I would start I would start to peel back from LinkedIn and a lot of these things that I do. I'm not one of those guys who's like, I'm always going to work forever. That's not what I want to do. That doesn't fill my cup. I like to provide for my family, but all things equal, like if I could just do whatever I wanted, I would spend a lot of time outside. I would play a lot of music and I would kick it with my kids and my wife and my dog. And that's
That's
it.
it. That's your goal. So that's your that's Sim's vision board. What do I want to do? And when I feel down, or when I don't want to have that tough conversation with my boss, or I don't want to make this other phone call, I have pictures all over where you can't see here. That's what I'm looking up at and saying, wow, okay, that's that. Okay, now I'm back. Let's get back into it.
Yep.
And that's why I keep this book behind me. I should get paid by Simon Sinek by now for selling it for him. But if you're listening to this, Simon, I really appreciate you. Um, Sims, this is unbelievable. I want as we start to wrap up here, I'd be curious, like, you get a lot of experience with different companies, I imagine, and different go-to-market teams, and just
Hmm.
understanding business. Like, even though you're a go-to-market advisor and consultant, every single company, there's the nuances make it like you're solving Rubik's cubes for each individual one. What is are there any like big common themes that you're hearing from customers now as we start 2025? And ultimately, like, what are people looking for most?
Yeah, the the biggest challenge that I hear from whether it's an individual seller, a team, or like I'm whispering into the ear of a CEO of a large company, The biggest challenge companies are having right now in the go-to-market space is attracting attention. It's booking meetings. And the reason I think is twofold. One, I think it's laziness, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit. Like we have so many tools at our disposal as salespeople, like whether it be AI or just RevOps tools, call recordings, we have all these tools at our disposal. And instead of saying, hey, I'm going to use these tools to make the mundane parts of my job easier or go by quicker so that I can focus on talking to my prospects, which is the main thing.
Mhm.
A lot of us do the opposite, and we lean on tools like that to do our prospecting and outreach for us. And then we wonder why global cold call and cold email success rates are like sub 1% right now.
Mhm.
So that is a big issue. And then the other issue is this, at least in the benefits business, we have this sense of like over professionalism is the way that I'll put it. So wanting to appear to be something that we're not to our prospects, where I feel like I can show up with all my tattoos and a backwards hat on and a t-shirt, and if I add enough value for you, you're going to buy from me just as you would have if I had been in a suit and tie, right? And that's the truth. But I think that we have this lack of authenticity in sales, and we have this lack of willingness to do the hard, unscalable things that make our prospects feel like we value them as human beings.
Oh, 100%. And I feel like you alluded to this briefly before, but it sounds like it's a core thing for you. It's like make sure that that person in that feels that they're the only person that matters when you're talking
Yeah.
to them, and you really care, and you're putting that spotlight right onto them, much like you would be doing in the music world where you're putting it on the audience, right? You're not distracted and you're not
Right.
whatever. I mean, maybe you are, but what you're doing is you're focusing your energy into reading the room and understanding that audience and giving them an experience. And especially like there's I guess here's the question on that too. Like where are the parallels between being on stage and doing that and holding a meeting? Because for me, it's like I love hosting webinars and things like that because I love to be able to control where
Yeah.
what like not just control the conversation, but be able to give somebody an experience and be able to make sure we're including multiple stakeholders and not just making sure Sims, the IT leader, isn't not sitting there and not talking to somebody or not enjoying
Right.
the time, right? How do you like owning the room? I'm sure is a huge one. But what other lessons do you have from music and performing and like that side of your world that you're also taking into the professional side too?
Absolutely. The biggest one, because I think I could talk about this all day, the biggest one is make people feel something. So when you go to a concert, even if it's a fantastic musician, if they have no stage presence, if they don't make you laugh or bring you to tears or make your heart swell, it's not going to be a memorable experience for you. And in the same way, if I go to a meeting or a conference or a sales training as an attendee, if the leader doesn't make me feel something, I'm less likely to remember anything they've said or that I even attended the event in the first place. So that's where I start when I'm crafting an experience for somebody else is like, how can I make everyone in this room feel some big emotion?
That's amazing. And that is a gigantic one. And I know I feel the emotions of how passionate and energized you are. And I hope that the audience does too. I'm sure that that's no secret to the musician that you are as well. Sims, last question I love to ask every single person on the show. If you were teaching a college 101 course based upon all of your previous life and work experience, what would you teach and why?
Three things. One, there is no shortcut to success. You have to do the hard work. Two, you will sleep better at night if you give yourself the space to bring your authentic self wherever you go, whether it be business, your personal life, whatever it is. And then the third is that there are rarely any truly bad experiences. You will almost always learn something very valuable. Even when I think back to like some of my least favorite jobs, I can always pick out one big thing that I never would have learned if I hadn't sat in that seat.
Well, and on that, and that's a fantastic course. I hope that you put this course together because I would absolutely, I think it's so valuable. But the other thing too is that like, those negative experiences, you could say as the leader, like, wow, that was a really bad experience. I'm going to make sure that I never make somebody feel that way or that I don't do this. So like, I would say that like I don't go looking for negative situations, but I always try to remind myself when I'm in the midst of it, when you feel like you have that pit or you just want to cry, like first go ahead and cry. That's fine. But number two, then it's like you have to reframe your mind of like, I know that in most situations that I've been in, when I get to the other side of this, it's usually that was what was meant to happen, or that was what needed to happen, or, like if I hadn't gone through that, then I wouldn't have learned X, Y, and Z. So it's really that mental reframing of I'm going to take this negative situation and turn it into a positive, and not to get all Tony Robbins, but like that turns no negatives. That turns like that really reduces the anxiety or stress of failing because it's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. You got to push through it. And when you have that thing, it's like you're not seeking it, but it also like really does help. Any final thoughts on that as we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've never learned a profound lesson from success. I've learned all of my profound lessons from failing.
I think that's a perfect spot to stop. Where can people learn more about you and everything you have going on, Sims?
So, if you don't know me, I spend way too much time on LinkedIn. So, you can find me on LinkedIn, Sims Tillerson, or at tillersonconsulting.com.
Sims, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, bro.